Hi, are you looking for a summertime pattern that would be beautiful out on your front porch? Maybe something that you can wrap up in on those cool summer evenings. Maybe you've got a lot of scraps like I do, and you want to be able to use up some of those scraps to be able to make this beautiful quilt. Well, I have just the pattern for you. My name is Lori Dickman. Thank you for stopping by my channel, Quilting with Lori. And I'm going to share with you today a pattern that's in my Speedy Solutions Scrappy Patterns book. It's called Comin Up Daisies, and it uses lots of your scraps. So let me take a moment here to show you how this quilt is put together. Okay, let's take a look at how this block goes together. It's called Comin Up Daisies, and you'll see here for each block that you're going to need to create this quilt, you're going to want four 4-inch brights, 12 1.5-inch light squares, and 4 1.5-inch yellow squares. Those happen to be the colors that I chose. You can certainly use anything that you have in your stash, but that just happens to be what I chose. The finished block will be 7 by 7, and my finished quilt that we have behind me on the wall is 50 by 50. But of course, depending on how many blocks you make, your quilt can be larger or smaller. Here is a selection of scraps that I have chosen, and you'll see here I've got 4 4-inch brights for my flower petals for the Comin Up Daisy block. I have 4 a variety of the 1.5-inch yellows, and I have 12 of the 1.5-inch whites. These yellows and whites will be used to snowball each and every one of these 4-inch squares. Let's see what I mean by that. So here we have 4 blue scraps. They're 4 inches squares, and we are going to snowball every corner of each of these blue squares. We're going to snowball the outside edges with white, and we're going to snowball the inside edges with yellow in my case. Again, your squares may have different fabric selection and fabric colors, but this just happens to be what I'm using. The first thing you're going to do is take a pen or pencil and draw a diagonal line across every one of the back side, the wrong side, of the 1.5-inch squares. Then you're going to place each of these squares on the outer corners, as you see me doing here. The yellow stays to the center. That's going to create the flower petal center, and the whites, in my case they're white, they're going to be on the outside edge. You're going to stitch on that diagonal line that you've drawn, and then you're going to press it open. You're going to cut away the excess and press it open, and there's the finished block. That's a snowballed flower petal block. So every one of these is going to have one corner that's got the yellow or whatever color you choose for your center, and the other 3 corners are going to be the outside edges of the petal. You'll do all of them in the same fashion. I like to do all of mine in assembly line fashion. And here we see all 4 petals have been snowballed with white on the outside, as you can see, and yellow on the inside. And then they'll be sewn together. Here is a block that is finished. It's been done in pinks, and I went ahead with a different color on the outside. Here's some really pretty green check that I've used for the outside, and I again just did yellow in the center. There's such a variety of options that you have at your fingertips, especially if you have quite a large scrap stash. There's so many fun things that you can do. You can make each and every block just as scrappy as you want, or if you want to have more control and have a controlled scrappy look, that's an option too. I just had fun with this, creating some a block that had the green checks here. Now if you would like the snowballed cornerstones like my quilt has, let me show you how that is done. And again, you're going to need a 2.5-inch square to snowball. In my case, I used yellow. You can use whatever you want, but I've used yellow. Again, you're going to snowball each and every corner. You're going to draw a diagonal line on a 1.5-inch square. And for this, I would recommend that you snowball opposite corners first, because this is just a small 2.5-inch square. Do the opposite sides, cut away the excess, press it open, then do the remaining 2 sides. You'll see here I've placed that there, I've sewn, and trim away the excess. And you have a snowballed cornerstone. And by doing it this way, doing the opposite sides as you're working around this square, it allows you to have that 1/4 inch seam allowance that you really need in order to sew this square into the sashing and into the blocks that you're going to be using. So that's really important. So I highly recommend that you snowball the opposite corners here and then do the remaining 2, and then you'll have a perfect snowballed square for your cornerstone. And then grab 2.5 inch width of fabric strips. In my case, I grabbed 2.5 inch strips from my strip container here, and I'm using, in this case, a beautiful bright green with hearts and flowers on it. It's 2.5 wide, and then you'll subcut it into 7.5 inch subcuts. You're going to need 40 7.5 inch subcuts if you're making the same quilt that I've made behind me. You'll need 25 snowballed squares. If you're making a larger quilt or a smaller quilt, you're going to need more or less depending on what you're doing. So let's take a look behind me at the quilt that I have hanging on the wall. So behind me here is the Comin Up Daisies quilt that I have completed. You'll see it in my pattern book, my Scrappy Patterns book. And it is a 50 by 50 inch quilt. There are 16 blocks in here. There are 25 cornerstone squares in here, and there are 40 7.5 inch cut sashings, which finish at 7 by 2 inches around each of these particular squares. To create this and to put it together, it's really simple. You're going to simply sew together a row that has a cornerstone sashing, and you're going to create 5 of those rows, and then you're going to create 4 rows where a sashing, a block, a sashing, a block goes together. And then you'll sew them all together. You'll notice then that each and every block is sashed. There is a 6 inch border out here, and you'll also notice that I created a flange binding on this quilt. And out on my website, I'll post a link to my website. Under the Learn tab on my website, I have a tutorial on how you can create a flange binding. It's a beautiful complementary binding. It's a wonderful binding to use if you're giving a quilt to a child and the quilt is going to be washed and dried a lot, because the binding goes on completely by machine. It's all done on your sewing machine. And it's a very pretty technique as well. So you'll want to check that out. I'll have a link in the description box. And on this quilt, I did a lot of free motion quilting. I did free motion in the sashing, free motion on all of the blocks as well. And in a moment, I'll show you a close-up of those blocks. If you would like to learn my techniques on how I scrap up my stash, how I cut it, sort it, organize it, and use it, you'll want to check out my techniques book. You'll find this out on my website. I'll have a link to it below. It's my Speedy Solutions to Cut and Organize Your Scrap Stash. I do have a complete 30-minute lecture available that you can actually view, and I'll have that linked below as well, so you can check it out. Along with that, I do have my patterns book. It's my Scrappy Speedy Solutions patterns book. There are 12 beautiful patterns in here that you can use your scrap stash and make some beautiful quilts. So I hope that you'll check that out as well. I hope you were inspired to make your own Comin Up Daisies scrappy quilt. I hope you had as much fun as I have making this quilt. Let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for stopping by my channel today, Quilting with Lori. Again, I'm Lori Dickman. Thanks again for stopping by. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Happy quilting. Have a great day.